What if Princess Diana didn't just break royal protocol? What if she declared war on the monarchy itself and nearly won? On November 20th, 1995, 23 million people in Britain turned on their televisions to watch the most explosive interview in royal history. Diana, Princess of Wales, sat in Kensington Palace wearing heavy black eyeliner and speaking directly to camera. And for 40 minutes, she systematically destroyed the institution that had destroyed her. She exposed Charles's affair. She questioned his fitness to be king. She revealed her own infidelity. She talked about bulimia, depression, and feeling hunted by the palace. And she delivered the line that would define her forever. There were 3 people in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded. The palace panicked. The Queen, watching in horror, immediately wrote letters demanding Charles and Diana divorce. The British public, torn between loyalty to the crown and sympathy for Diana, questioned whether the monarchy had any place in the modern world. This is the story of Diana's revenge, the interview that was supposed to set her free but may have sealed her fate, and the shocking revelation decades later that Diana had been manipulated into giving it through lies and forgery. This wasn't just an interview, it was an act of war, and both sides would pay the price. Let's start with why Diana agreed to do the interview in the first place. By 1995, Diana's marriage to Prince Charles had been over in all but name for years. They'd separated in December 1992 after a decade of mutual misery. Charles had resumed his relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles openly. Diana had had her own affairs, most notably with James Hewitt, a cavalry officer who later betrayed her by selling his story. The palace wanted the separation to be quiet, dignified, private. Diana wanted the opposite. She wanted the world to know what the royal family had done to her. But Diana faced a problem. She had no platform. The palace controlled media access. Royal correspondents depended on palace cooperation for stories, so they wouldn't risk angering the institution by giving Diana a sympathetic hearing. Tabloids would publish anything but couldn't be trusted to present her seriously. Diana needed mainstream credibility, a respected journalist, a major network, an interview that would be taken as truth rather than dismissed as tabloid gossip. Enter Martin Bashir. In 1995, Bashir was a relatively unknown journalist working for BBC's Panorama program. He was ambitious, hungry for a career-making story, and willing to do whatever it took to get it. Through mutual acquaintances, Bashir learned that Diana was interested in giving a major interview to tell her side of the story. But Diana was cautious. She'd been burned before by journalists who'd twisted her words or betrayed her trust. She needed to be convinced that Bashir was trustworthy and that the palace wasn't monitoring her. This is where Bashir crossed the line from aggressive journalism into outright fraud. To gain Diana's trust, he created fake bank statements suggesting that people close to Diana, including her private secretary Patrick Jepson and her brother Charles Spencer's head of security, were being paid by intelligence services to spy on her. The forged documents showed large payments from suspicious sources, implying that Diana was under surveillance and that people she trusted were betraying her to the palace. When Bashir showed Diana these documents, her paranoia, already heightened by years of actual palace manipulation and media harassment, went into overdrive. She believed the fake evidence. She thought her worst fears were confirmed. The establishment was monitoring her. People around her were reporting on her. She was on siege. And Bashir positioned himself as the one person she could trust. The journalist brave enough to give her a platform despite palace pressure. Diana agreed to the interview. But here's what she didn't know. Bashir had lied to get access. The bank statements were forgeries created by a BBC graphic designer. The surveillance was fiction. Bashir had manipulated a vulnerable woman who was already struggling with depression and paranoia, feeding her fears to get the story that would make his career. And it worked. Diana, believing she had nothing left to lose and that the establishment was already conspiring against her, decided to go nuclear. The interview was filmed on November 5, 1995, in Diana's private sitting room at Kensington Palace. Only a small crew was present: cameraman, sound engineer, Bashir, and Diana. No palace officials, no advisors. Just Diana, alone, making the decision that would change everything. She wore a black suit, minimal jewelry, and heavy dark eyeliner that made her eyes look enormous and sad. The staging was deliberate. She wanted to look vulnerable but strong, victimized but not broken. Bashir's questions were sympathetic but probing. He asked about her marriage, her mental health, her relationships with Charles and the royal family. And Diana answered with a frankness that shocked everyone who watched it. She talked about her bulimia, describing how the pressure of royal life and her failing marriage drove her to harmful behaviors. She talked about her depression and feeling of inadequacy. She revealed that she'd harmed herself, saying, "You have so much pain inside yourself that you try to hurt yourself on the outside because you want help." But the most explosive moments came when Diana discussed Charles and Camilla. There were 3 people in this marriage, she said, so it was a bit crowded. The line was devastating, simple, memorable, and utterly damning. She confirmed what everyone had suspected. Charles had never stopped loving Camilla, and Diana had never stood a chance. She talked about discovering evidence of Charles's affair, phone calls, gifts, meetings, and feeling betrayed and humiliated. Then came the question that would haunt the royal family for years. Did Diana think Charles should be king? Her answer was carefully calibrated. She didn't say no directly. That would have been too inflammatory. Instead, she questioned whether Charles wanted to be king, whether he'd be happy in the role, whether the crown might be a very lonely place for him. The implication was clear. Charles wasn't suited to be king. And if Charles shouldn't be king, then the line of succession should skip him and go directly to William. Diana, in 40 minutes, had effectively questioned her ex-husband's fitness to inherit the throne. She also revealed her own affair with James Hewitt, admitting, "Yes, I adored him. Yes, I was in love with him." This was risky. It made her sympathetic to accusations of hypocrisy, but Diana framed it as a consequence of Charles's neglect. She'd been lonely, abandoned by her husband, desperate for affection. Hewitt had given her what Charles wouldn't. The public, primed to see Diana as a victim, largely accepted this narrative. And then came Diana's most ambitious statement. When asked what role she saw for herself, she said, "I'd like to be a queen of people's hearts. Not the Queen of England." She'd lost that title when she lost her HRH status. But a different kind of queen. One who connected with ordinary people, who used her platform for humanitarian work, who challenged the stuffy, outdated institution she'd married into. It was a direct challenge to the monarchy. Diana was saying she could be more beloved, more relevant, more powerful than the actual queen, not through title or protocol, but through authentic connection with the public. The interview aired on November 20th, 1995. 23 million people in Britain watched, over 40% of the population. The reaction was seismic. Some praised Diana for her courage and honesty. Others condemned her for airing private family matters publicly. The tabloids had a field day, splashing Diana's most explosive quotes across front pages. And the palace went into crisis mode. The queen, who'd tried for 3 years to manage the separation quietly, was furious. She'd believed Diana would eventually accept her role as a divorced royal who maintained dignity and privacy. Instead, Diana had weaponized her victimhood and turned public opinion into a force the palace couldn't control. Within weeks, the queen wrote personal letters to both Charles and Diana, essentially ordering them to divorce immediately. The marriage was formally dissolved on August 28, 1996, less than a year after the interview. But the interview did more than end Diana's marriage. It fundamentally changed the relationship between the monarchy and the British public. For centuries, the royal family had maintained power through mystique. They were above ordinary people, mysterious, dignified, untouchable. Diana shattered that mystique. She showed that royals were just people, flawed, unhappy, trapped by the institution they represented. And once that mystique was broken, it could never be fully restored. The interview also exposed deep divisions in British society. Traditionalists saw Diana as a traitor who'd violated the sacred privacy of the monarchy. Progressives saw her as a brave woman exposing an outdated, cruel institution. Young people, especially women, identified with Diana's struggles with mental health and difficult relationships. Older generations, loyal to the Queen, saw Diana as ungrateful and attention-seeking. The monarchy became a battleground for competing visions of what Britain should be: traditional or modern, hierarchical or egalitarian, private or transparent. Charles was humiliated. Diana had confirmed his affair with Camilla to the world, making it impossible for him to ever present their relationship as something innocent or recent. His reputation, already damaged by leaked phone conversations with Camilla that had been published in tabloids, was destroyed. Opinion polls showed the majority of Britons didn't think Charles should be king. Some wanted William to inherit directly, skipping Charles entirely. Charles would spend the next decade trying to rehabilitate his image, slowly convincing the public that Camilla made him happy and that he deserved a second chance. But Diana's victory came at a cost. The palace, no longer constrained by the pretense of family unity, began a subtle campaign to undermine her. Briefings to royal correspondents suggested Diana was mentally unstable, manipulative, using her sons for public sympathy. Stories emerged about Diana's affairs, her demands for money, her difficult behavior with staff. The establishment had tolerated Diana when she was Charles's wife. Now that she'd declared war, they fought back. And then there's the darkest interpretation, that the Panorama interview sealed Diana's fate. Conspiracy theorists argue that by questioning Charles's fitness to be king, by positioning herself as a rival power center, Diana made herself too dangerous to live. The establishment, according to this theory, couldn't allow Diana to continue undermining the monarchy. Within 2 years of the interview, she was dead. Coincidence or consequence?
The official investigations found no connection between the interview and Diana's death. But what's undeniable is that the interview made powerful people very angry. Prince Philip, according to multiple sources, was furious. He saw Diana's behavior as unforgivable betrayal. Whether that anger motivated anything beyond cold treatment is speculation, but it's worth noting that Diana's death, whether accident or murder, benefited the monarchy enormously. Without Diana constantly in the headlines, criticizing the institution and drawing sympathy from the public, the royal family could begin repairing their image. Charles could eventually marry Camilla. William and Harry could be shaped by palace handlers rather than Diana's influence. The interview made Diana powerful but also expendable. Now let's talk about the revelation that changed everything: Martin Bashir's lies. For 25 years, the Panorama interview was considered Diana's brave truth-telling. But in 2020, Diana's brother, Charles Spencer, came forward with explosive allegations. He revealed that Bashir had shown him forged bank statements in 1995, suggesting that palace officials and intelligence services were paying people to spy on Diana. Spencer believed these documents influenced Diana's decision to do the interview. He demanded investigation. The BBC launched an independent inquiry led by retired Judge Lord Dyson. In May 2021, Dyson's report confirmed Spencer's allegations. Bashir had commissioned fake bank statements, shown them to Spencer and Diana, and used them to gain trust and access. The BBC had failed to properly investigate when questions were raised in 1996. Senior BBC executives had covered up the scandal to protect the corporation's reputation. The revelation was devastating. It meant Diana's most famous interview, the moment she took control of her narrative, was built on lies. Bashir had manipulated her, feeding her paranoia to get the story. Diana had believed she was under surveillance when she wasn't. She'd been deceived into an interview that destroyed her marriage, damaged the monarchy, and possibly contributed to her death. William and Harry issued statements condemning the BBC and Bashir. William said, "The BBC's failures contributed significantly to her fear, paranoia, and isolation in her final years." Harry added that the interview was part of a culture of exploitation and unethical practices that ultimately took her life. Both princes blamed the media manipulation Diana experienced for her death, arguing that constant harassment and betrayal made her vulnerable and desperate. The BBC apologized. Bashir resigned from his position at the corporation, but the damage was done. One of the most iconic moments in television history was revealed to be the product of fraud. And Diana, who'd given the interview believing she was fighting back against real conspiracies, had actually been manipulated by a journalist exploiting her vulnerabilities for career advancement. But here's the complicated part. Even though Bashir lied to get the interview, everything Diana said in it was true. She really did have bulimia. Charles really was having an affair with Camilla. The royal family really had been cold and unsupportive. Diana's experiences and emotions were genuine, even if Bashir's methods were fraudulent. So, should the interview be dismissed entirely, or should it still be seen as Diana's honest testimony despite the circumstances that produced it? This question divides historians and Diana's admirers. Some argue the interview should be erased from history, never rebroadcast, never referenced, treated as tainted evidence. Others argue Diana's words stand regardless of how she was convinced to say them. She wanted to tell her story. Bashir gave her the platform, even if he lied to get access. The result was still Diana's truth. What remains is tragedy layered upon tragedy. Diana wanted control over her narrative. She wanted to expose the institution that destroyed her. She achieved that goal. The interview damaged the monarchy in ways it's never fully recovered from. But she achieved it through manipulation, feeding paranoia that made her final years even more difficult. She declared war on the royal family and won the battle, but it may have cost her the war. And 26 years after her death, we learned that even her moment of greatest power was built on lies designed to exploit her vulnerabilities. What do you believe? Was Diana's Panorama interview an act of brave truth-telling, or a manipulated woman being used by an ambitious journalist? Did the interview help Diana or harm her? And did it contribute to her death by making her too dangerous to the establishment? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. This is one of the most controversial moments in Diana's life, and understanding it requires looking at both her agency and her vulnerability. If this investigation changed how you see Diana's most famous interview, hit that like button and share it with anyone who thinks they understand the full story. Subscribe to Crown Conspiracies for more investigations into the media manipulation and palace wars that defined Diana's life. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next royal battle.